Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to focus on how to use the Superba Forma, this green unit at the back of the machine. And if you're familiar with knit radars or knit leaders from other types of knitting machine, this is exactly the same thing. And it's actually identical to the version that they made for PASOP or PASOP. So if you have one for PASOP machine, you could actually use it on your Superba as far as I'm aware. So I just wanted to take you through how to use that, how to set it up, and I guess the first thing I should do is show you sort of the principal parts of the machine. So at the back, you have this roller, and that is what feeds through your half-scale drawing. Okay, so you'll have a pattern that looks like this, which scrolls through as you're knitting. It'll be going downward with every row. And in addition to showing you where to increase and decrease, it tells you how many stitches to cast on, basically everything that you would get with a written pattern, except it's in a diagram format. So that's a lot easier for some people like myself. So like I said, that feeds through the roller. Then you'll put a ruler like this in front with your stitch information on it once you've made a tension swatch. And don't worry, I'll go over that in some detail. This piece here locks or unlocks the pattern as it rolls through. This knob here is for manually feeding the paper. This is all for setting up your rows, and I'll go into that in much more detail as well, but you've got a sliding scale thing here, which denotes whether or not one of these ticks is valued at half a stitch, 1 stitch, or 2 stitches. And this little slider here will be to actually select your number of rows that you got on your swatch, and there's a black lever here that you need to pull forward in order to adjust that slider. As well, this here is the operating lever that trips when you pass the carriage, and that will actually feed the paper through with every row that you knit. So these here are the pattern sheets that come with the Forma, or maybe don't come with the Forma, but you can find them on eBay and other such places. And these ones are the ones branded Technique SIT, which I can't remember what that stands for in French, but that's who made all the Superba double bed machines and single bed machines. So just looking at the garment here, it's got sort of an illustration of what it is. I gather it's a zip cardigan. And initially I had a hard time, this is pattern number 14 by the way. Initially I had a hard time figuring out whether it was supposed to be for adults or children. If you zoom in here though, she looks like a child, and then they've given height measurements in centimeters, which is a little bit different to some of the other knit radars that I've worked with. The patterns don't have a height measurement. They would normally give you like a chest measurement. But anyway, I did work out the heights, and these are definitely for a child. So A, B, C, and D. My 3-year-old fits into somewhere between the B and C, so I'll be making the C size. Of course, had I just read the manual more thoroughly before I began, I would have known that the lowercase letters are the children's sizes. So I wouldn't have had to do that math, but oh well. So this is a child's pattern that I'm going to be making on the Forma. It's a pretty simple shape. I'm still not entirely sure how the front is knitted, if it's supposed to be knitted in one piece with the back, or 2 pieces with the backs and then join up the back. I have to look at that a little more closely. But the sleeve looks to be sort of a drop shoulder style from what I can see there. And the sleeve is quite an easy looking sleeve. So that's where I decided to start. Just make one of those, make sure the device is working properly, everything clicks along, and you know, at the appropriate rate. And once I can determine if it's working, we can get a little more fancy. So once you've decided on the yarn that you want to use for your project, you need to knit a swatch. This is the next step. There is a method described in the manual for the Superba Forma for measuring your swatch, and it involves cutting a 10 centimeter by 10 centimeter square out of a piece of cardboard and using that like a frame. Oh, how do you do a square? There we go. That's not a square, but you get the idea, to measure the rows and stitches. It's kind of interesting. I've never actually done that before, but for me, I just use my only tape measure with centimeters, because even though we're in Canada, would you believe I typically use inches? But for this to work, this particular device, you have to measure your tension over 10 centimeters. So go ahead and do that. You can see here it's all curly, but when you lay it out, I have 24 stitches over 10 centimeters and 32 rows over 10 centimeters. So go ahead and write your tension down. And I've done a swatch and ribbing as well, just to make sure that I like how everything's going to look and feel when it's knitted. And once you've got that information, you're ready to actually head back to the Forma and set up the device. So you need to grab your stitch scale rulers and find the ones that have your appropriate number of stitches on the left-hand side. So you'll see I actually have 2 here, and I'll explain why that is in a second, but 24 stitches per 10 centimeters is the one we want. So now you'll see, if I can get this to focus, that we have 2 rulers that say that. One has a 0 in the middle, and one has a 0 at the left. The one we want for this pattern that I'm knitting has the 0 at the left, and I'll show you why. On our actual pattern sheet for the garment that we're knitting, you can see the 0 mark is at the left. So even though the sleeve is going to be symmetrical and we're going to be knitting on either side of 0 a symmetrical sleeve, we want the ruler that has 0 at the left to correspond with the diagram. If you had the whole sleeve drawn out, for example, instead of just half the sleeve, if this was over like this and 0 was here and the sleeve went up this way and this way, that's when you would want the ruler with the 0 in the middle. I hope that makes sense. So for our purposes, the one we want is our 24 stitches ruler with 0 at the left-hand side. Okay, and then all you do to insert it in the device is lift this flap up, and inside here there's actually 2 little metal clips that you just pop the ruler in, like so. And try to make sure it's not wavy. Oops. You need to make sure it's over to the right far enough as well, or when you shut the thing it will pop it out. So that's good. It's even in there. After you've selected the appropriate stitch scale ruler and inserted it in the machine, you need to set up this slider for your rows. So this little, I guess it's a lever, I'm not sure what you'd call this slider thing, has different gradations on it. So right now, I'll zoom in and you can see that it's set to 0.5. There we go. If I lift it up 1, it says 1. If I lift up again, it says 2. So those numbers represent these little ticks right here and the number of stitches, or rows rather, that they represent. So to make that less confusing, if I leave it on 0.5, that means that each one of these little ticks is worth half of a row. So looking down, we need to find our number of rows that we got on our tension swatch over 10 centimeters, which was 32. So then I can see here's the number 30, here's 32 and a half. We need to count in between to find 32. And then you just pull this black lever, whoops, and slide this down to where you need it to be. And release. And that's it. If you can't find your number on the first one, check the next one, check the next one. If you can't find anything close to the number of rows that you counted over 10 centimeters, I mean, we're talking you're not even in the ballpark, it goes up to 140. If you had more than that, or if you had less than 20, you may want to remeasure your swatch. This pretty much covers the limits of what you'll get knitting yarns that are suitable for the Superba machine. So if your rows does not fall into that, like I said, definitely double check your swatch and look for problems there. So once you've set up your rows and your stitches with the stitch scale, it's time to insert your pattern into the machine. Inserting the pattern into the machine is actually a super simple process. You just slide it in. Make sure this flap is lifted up and that you have this unlocked, set to the left. Grab your pattern and you can see at the top of the page it has 2 arrows. You're going to be sliding this in from the back to the front. So from underneath the black roller to the front. It just pops up like that. Pull it up. Adjust it to where you want it to be, and then lock it when you're happy. Make sure that your 0 mark on your ruler lines up with the green line for 0, and you can sort of finally adjust that by moving it around when it's unlocked. Make sure that everything is straight, exactly straight along the ruler. You might need to adjust this a few times. Then go ahead and lock it, and you'll see it doesn't slide around anymore. But you can use this knob to adjust where you want to be on the pattern. So I'll go ahead and set that up a little bit further, off camera, and show you where we're going to start knitting. Once your pattern sheet is lined up correctly, 0 lines up with 0, and you are lined up straight with the line to start knitting your sleeve or whatever piece of the garment you're knitting, you're ready to go. So what you need to do next is determine how many stitches to cast on, and in this case cast on either side of 0. So if we recall, I was going to be knitting pattern size C. Just follow this line down and it lines up with 24. So that means I need to cast on 24 stitches either side of 0, and because this is a sleeve, or a cuff rather, that I'm doing in 1x1 rib, I'll set that up in a 1x1 rib configuration. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and cast on here 24 stitches on either side of 0 in 1x1 ribbing. Go ahead and hang your comb and your weights. And you'll notice that it's actually going to trip the forma. So when I'm ready to start knitting the rib for real, like my first actual row, I'll have to turn this back. But for now, just do circular rows. And then we can actually start knitting. And you can see how with every row, as it trips the operating lever, it advances the pattern in the forma. One thing to watch for, I've actually ironed these pages because mine arrived really curly, and as they were coming back, it was going under here and getting stuck. So after I'd done a certain number of rows, the paper stopped advancing. There is supposed to be a metal wire that goes there to hold this up, and I don't know if that would help that problem anyways, but just something to keep an eye on as you're knitting along. So I've completed my ribbed section, and you can see here my stitch scale is lined up exactly with the line where I'm to stop knitting the rib. And that is 16 rows on my row counter, which I cheated and already did the first sleeve, and that's the same number of rows, so that's a good thing. And actually, if you do the math, 16 rows should end up being about 5 centimeters. The rows were the same in my rib section as in my stockinette section on the swatch. So when we look at the pattern, the diagram, it says here that the rib section is supposed to be 5 centimeters. So that's just a quick and easy check to see, am I on track? Is the forma working correctly? Is it advancing at the appropriate rate? And most importantly, did I measure my swatch correctly? Because that's where a lot of times I go wrong. Maybe I didn't rest the swatch long enough, that kind of thing. So now we know that we're humming along correctly, so that's good. I'm going to go off camera and move everything to the back bed so that I can carry on in stockinette, and I'll see you back here in just a minute. Now that I've transferred all the stitches from the front bed to the back bed, I'm going to go ahead and keep on knitting in stockinette. And let me just zoom in on the forma itself. Whoa! You'll see as you move along up the pattern, it's going to get wider. So all you do when this marker that lines up with the number of stitches is when the pattern has moved over to 25, for example, that means you need to increase 1 stitch on either side. And you'll see sometimes it'll be in the middle, and obviously you don't want to actually do the increase until you're fully at that line. And you'll start to notice a pattern. So for example, it'll be, say, every 7 or every 8 rows, that kind of thing. It's just easier than having to count those rows in your head or on the row counter. Have I done 7? Have I done 6? At least for me. So that's why I like it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for a little while, and just so you can see what that looks like. So now that mark has moved over and it lines up exactly with the 25. So I need to increase 1 stitch on each side. Remember, it's a sleeve, so we want it to be symmetrical, at least for this sleeve we do. And I always do this fully fashioned, but you can do it in whatever way you're most comfortable. I hope if I'm doing something that looks really bad, by the way, or is wrong, someone will pipe up in the comments and tell me. But I've always done it this way and it hasn't been an issue, so I'm gonna keep doing it. There we go. And then I'm just gonna keep knitting along in stockinette until we get to the next increase. Move up my edge claws as well as we go. And it looks like 1 more row should do it. Yep. Then we're going to increase again. So I'm just going to keep on doing that all the way up the sleeve. Like I said, it's a really, really simple sleeve until I get to this mark here. And then I'm going to knit straight for several rows. And then here you could either cast off or take the sleeve onto waste yarn. So I've reached the end of my sleeve on the Forma pattern. And now I'm just going to take this off onto waste yarn and go and measure it against the measurements given in the pattern and see how close we are. So I've just taken this sleeve here off the machine and I wanted to just compare it against the measurements given on the diagram on the Forma pages to make sure that it came out the right size. Obviously the up and down measurement is going to be a little bit off right now because it's been stretched out on the machine, but the side to side stitch measurement seems to be okay across the top, and where it's got the measurements listed, it seems pretty bang on. So that's nice. I'm happy with that. I think everything's working correctly. And I held it up to the person it's intended for, and it seems like it's going to be the right size, so that's nice. I also wanted to just brag a little because I was working from 2 different cakes of yarn, one that I'd been using for swatching and testing and that kind of thing, and I wanted to try and get the 2 sleeve color changes in the same place, and I'd say I did a pretty good job with the amount of yarn that was left on that cake, so that's just me tooting my own horn. But anyway, that's how easy it is to use the Superba Forma. It's really simple as long as you have the rulers and as long as you measure and make your swatch correctly. That's probably the most important part. So as soon as I get a chance, I'm going to go ahead and knit the rest of this cardigan, but that might not be for a little while. So I figure I'll get this video up and then maybe by, Christmas, I'll have the rest of it knitted. Thanks again for watching. If you have any comments, questions, anything you want to share, feel free to sound off in the comments. And I'm going to include a link to the manual for the Forma as well as, and I'll include a link to the rulers that you can print off. And that's it. Thanks again. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and I'd love to hear from you.